So, Enam, thank you very much for accepting our invitation. Shukran ktir. And we look forward to your talk.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Really is an honor for me, and I hope I have something useful to say. I've never before addressed a bunch of computational linguists, are you, or computer scientists, but I'll try. So what I thought might be useful is to talk a little bit about the origins of Arabic. There is a lot of mythology attached to Arabic in particular. Many languages have mythologies attached to them. Sometimes these mythologies remain as myths that people entertain themselves with, but on occasions myths can become so entrenched and perceived as reality, which can have serious consequences, and indeed in the case of Arabic there is quite a bit of that. So I'm hoping that by presenting some facts about, and now they are facts because we have forensic evidence for the origins of Arabic in the form of inscriptions that have been deciphered, which have had consequences on the way we look at the origins of the language and how it moved, how it spread. Of course, the history of any language is in part the history of the people who speak that language. Languages do not move of their own accord, they move with their speakers. So some of what I am saying has to do with the people themselves. And after that, I'll just give a broad overview of the types of variations that we find in Arabic in terms of varieties, but also variation within these varieties, which necessarily means that we have to look at social factors. I am a sociolinguist, a strong believer in the power of social factors in directing linguistic change, and in fact sometimes directing linguistic changes that are counterintuitive, in the sense that in linguistics there is such a thing as universals. So there are language changes that are expected, and there are language changes that are not expected or happen rarely. And if we integrate social factors into the equation of trying to analyze variation and change, we very often find that social factors are so powerful that they can redirect linguistic change that otherwise would have been expected to move in a different direction. And so I'll end my talk with an overview of some of the recent research that has been carried out mainly by our research group at Essex that looked at various communities, Arabic-speaking communities, and on the basis of this aggregate of locally based studies, we were able to reach some generalizations. So you will notice, hopefully, that I advocate reaching generalizations starting bottom up rather than top down. And I hope this will become clear as I speak. Okay, and before I begin also, I would like to acknowledge the help and cooperation of my colleague and friend Ahmed Al-Jallad, who is a prominent epigraphist, a specialist in deciphering and reading and analyzing the ancient inscriptions. Ahmed has supplied me with his material, so much of what I'm going to say, especially in the first part, is based on Ahmed's work. If you need, sorry, I don't have the list of references at the end, but if anyone is interested, please contact me or you can look him up. Okay, so I thought I'll begin with this very simple family tree. So languages are organized in family trees, very much to simulate a genealogical normal family tree that demonstrates the relationship between languages that are clearly related. So some of the best known language family trees is Indo-European, for instance, to which English belongs, but also Sanskrit and Persian also belongs to the same language family. The language family that Arabic belongs to is called the Semitic language family. It's an unfortunate name, but it has become current. It has no religious biblical implication at all. It is just a conventional name. And the Semitic languages themselves are part of a larger family of languages that we now call Afro-Asiatic language family. But I'll focus on this group of related languages that are called Semitic languages. Now, in historical linguistics, the way these relations are demonstrated, illustrated, is based on the assumption which is based on analysis of these languages that demonstrate the shared features as well as shared innovation. So there are two things that we rely on in determining which language goes where. The shared as well as shared features as well as shared innovations. All languages change. Shared innovations are just as important. So this family firstly branches off into an East and West group. Arabic belongs to the West group. The East group, you might have heard of Akkadian, for instance, or Assyrian, Babylonian. They belong to that group. Arabic belongs to the West Semitic group, which in turn branches off into at least 3 branches. And it is now widely agreed that Arabic descends from the subgroup that is called Central Semitic. And you notice that alongside Arabic, there are also other members of the same family. So for instance, what is called ancient South Arabian. There is another group that is called modern South Arabian, but it's not part of this branch. And there is also Northwest Semitic languages. You might recognize some of these names, so Canaanite, Aramaic, which is still alive in various parts of the Middle East, as well as Ugaritic, for which we have inscriptions that go back, I think, 8,000 years or so. And Arabic is one of these languages from this branch. Now, here, if I would like to just point out a general statement that we often hear in debates of various sorts on social media. Social media has become a problem, I think, for that, because very often wrong information is passed on because everyone can say something about it. So often we hear, for instance, from the Arab side that Arabic is the mother of all of these Semitic languages, or that Arabic derived from Arabic. This, to linguists, is incorrect. These languages are sister languages or cousin languages or something like that. They are closely related. They have always been spoken in a relatively small area. And I will show maps of where we think these languages were spoken. So it is only normal that these languages share a lot, share the bulk, in fact, of linguistic features. This is how they belong to the same family, based on these shared features. And also the speakers of these various languages have probably always been in contact with one another, such that even if they didn't inherit, even in cases of features that were not inherited from the parent language, they, through contact, they came to converge at some points, but they also diverged at other points in history. Just to give you an idea of today's situation with Semitic languages, where they are spoken, you notice that the Arabic group, and we call them now Arabic languages, not just language, the Arabic group has been the most successful, if we want to put it this way, in terms of the number of speakers who use it for daily purposes. It is estimated that in the region of 300 million perhaps are native speakers of one of the Arabic languages. In addition to Arabic, some of the other Semitic languages you see here. So Toroyo is a variety of Aramaic spoken there. Various pockets of Aramaic dialects, or Syriac sometimes they're called, are spoken also within the same region. Hebrew is another language that is Semitic and was revived, but it has a separate story also. Hebrew, modern Hebrew in relation to Old Hebrew, is another story. And you also notice some of these Semitic languages that continue to be used down in the southern part of the peninsula and at the African Horn. Okay, but Arabic is a lot more widely spread, and we know how that spread, how the language spread through conquest mainly. And today, the situation today is that it is the largest of these languages. I would also like to point out that Maltese is also Arabic. It is considered a separate language, but really its roots are as an Arabic dialect of perhaps the Maghrebi type that is spoken by a relatively small population in Malta. Okay. With respect to the earliest attestations of Arabic, it used to be thought that pre-Islamic evidence of, so when I say pre-Islamic, I'm talking about before 7th century, that the evidence for Arabic that we had before Islam was limited. It was thought to be limited to a few texts which are listed here, for the most part consisting of 3 texts, all of which were found in Syria. And these were written in the Arabic script that we are familiar with, which are dated to, roughly speaking, the 6th century, in addition to a couple of Nabatean texts. The earliest probably is dated to the 2nd century CE. Very often it is very difficult to date texts, but sometimes there are references to battles, for instance, or to kings, that then help us date roughly the time that the text was engraved. So when I say early 2nd century CE and 4th century, this should have been, yes, CE, that's right. So we're giving quite a wide time frame, but this is normal really in this type of study. Now, the Nabateans actually spoke Arabic. There is enough evidence to suggest that they spoke Arabic. And when I say they spoke Arabic, it doesn't necessarily mean that they were Arabs, although it is likely, okay? And that is simply because any nation can speak any language, yeah? There is no necessary connection between race, ethnicity, and the language that people speak. But it is very likely, more than very likely probably, that the Nabateans themselves, you might have heard of the city of Petra in Jordan, that was their base mainly, spoke Arabic but wrote Aramaic. Aramaic was the language for written purposes during the Nabatean times. So their inscriptions, what they left is for the most part in Aramaic. But their Aramaic, their written Aramaic betrayed their their native language. So often they used Arabic words, for instance, or constructions that demonstrate that they may have spoken Arabic. Now, this sort of evidence, very limited evidence, led to the conclusion that Arabic remained a purely spoken language until the 6th century. However, the decoding and analysis of inscriptions predating Islam by several centuries and written in a variety of scripts. Now, the modern Arabic script actually was developed probably by the Nabateans from Aramaic script. But before that, it turned out that Arabic was indeed written. However, it used different scripts, a variety of scripts that I'll show some of. So the deciphering of these inscriptions shed new light on the early history of Arabic. In fact, turning it upside down if we think about it. But before, let me show you, this is the earliest, so far, the earliest inscription, considered the earliest inscription of Arabic that we have. You can't see it clearly here, but it's a prayer. Most of these inscriptions on rocks are prayers of some sort and various other personal things. So names of the people who engraved it, and then some sort of invocation to the deities or the gods at the time. So this particular one, which was found in an area, a place called Bayer in southeast Jordan and not far from the city of Ma'an, that calls upon the gods of the three then kingdoms, famous kingdoms. Now we can call them located in today's Jordan, namely the kingdoms of Ammon, Moab, and Edom. And this is what it reads. So, O Malcolm and Chemosh and Qaus, the three gods, in you we seek refuge. This, to date, is considered the earliest attestation of Arabic and is dated to something like this. So it's dated to the first millennium BCE. Yes?
Can you please read that in Arabic?
Sorry?
Can you please read that in Arabic?
Right, in the language that it is spoken. Now, you want to remember that Semitic languages are not vocalized, so it's consonantal skeleton, right? So what vowels are in between the consonants is a matter for linguists to work out. So this is something like bikum awdhan, yeah, na'udhu, or something like that, yeah. But the vowels will have to be worked out.
I just was interested to know if it sounds different from today's Arabic.
It sounds similar and different, both, yes, but it is Arabic for sure, yeah? It is certainly Arabic. Okay, now the corpus of such inscriptions more inscriptions were discovered since the Bayer one. They became very abundant in the region of 70,000 specimens of short texts were discovered. Now, in addition, and they continue to be discovered, they increase in yearly basis, and many of these, I think the ones that have been deciphered are about 40,000 or something like that, which were written by nomads for the most part and concentrated. This is a very important point. Where these inscriptions that are definitely Arabic, where they were concentrated, will tell us probably something about the original homeland of the group of people who spoke Arabic. And for the most part, these were concentrated in this area, in the basalt desert that is between Syria and Jordan, that is called Al-Harra, in addition to various inscriptions that were discovered farther south within Jordan or the northwestern part of Arabia. Okay, so roughly speaking, in this circle, the vast, all of them, in fact, were concentrated there. This will become important in a second. Now, the concentration, so in addition to the concentration of scripts that have been determined to be Arabic, the inscriptions that were found inside the peninsula, so in the peninsula proper, in the central part or the southern part, are not Arabic. Many of them are written in scripts that are named here. These are names of scripts: Thamudic A, B, C, D. Safayitic is the name of the script. It's a South Arabian script, a northern variety of a South Arabian script. And so Safayitic and Hizmaic are Arabic, but the inscriptions that were found inside the peninsula proper are not Arabic. Very often we don't know what it is. Linguists continue to work on those, but they're not Arabic. This is extremely important because what it suggests rather strongly is that Arabic didn't go, as has been the popular view, it didn't move from inside the peninsula upwards, northwards, but rather from the north to the south, which is what prompted Ahmed al-Jallad to call it Arabic upside down. So it moved from the area that we know today as the southern Levant, for the most part, so which consists mainly of the countries that we call Syria, Jordan, Palestine, and Lebanon. So this is the Levant. That it moved from there to the peninsula. When is not very cleared. It may have been during Nabatean times that the peninsula proper was Arabized. So the peninsula proper was actually Arabized. Arabic didn't come from there. So, okay, likely therefore that the Arabic speaking realm is in this area, and if you like, the ancient home of the Arabs, which is quite a transformation of the way that we think of the history of Arabic. Now, from there then, it started to move elsewhere, but I thought I'll show you some pictures of the basalt desert, the Harra. This is from Jordan. It's practically like this, and that's where linguists, epigraphists work. They find these inscriptions on rocks like that, on black rocks. It's a vast area, and here are some of these inscriptions, rather nice ones. This is a woman playing a double reed flute there, and a man, by the looks of it, dancing there with inscription talking about the woman who is playing the flute. This is a battle between two horsemen. I can't remember what this is, and this is my favorite. And I'll tell you why it is my favorite in a second. What it shows is dancers, a group of 6 men here dancing with a leader dancer, and the flute there, a man with long hair playing the flute. And notice, if you like, what they are wearing, the way their dress is designed, and compare it with this. This is modern Jordan. This is the Ma'an folklore band. Exactly the same type of dress, which is an important observation. This talks to us about cultural continuity. And what they are doing here is very similar to this dance. So they're going like this. And in fact, traditionally in this dance, there is always a lead man that is called hashi. Very similar to what we see in the inscription. And with the flute continues to be used, called midwith, double reed flute. Okay. So from there, Arabic spread, as we know, through conquest, mainly with the expansion of the Arab Muslim conquest. It went everywhere at various points. The areas around where it started from were Arabized very early on, so 7th century. Egypt also, Arabic reached there in the 7th century, and from Egypt to the rest of the Nile Valley. But one observation that we have to make is that Arabic didn't immediately take over in these places that it moved to. What the Arabs used to do is establish garrison towns, like Cairo, for instance, establish garrison towns in towns. They were concentrated in towns first, and later on spread to the countryside. But Arabic didn't take over immediately. We have to remember that the places, or at least some of the places that it arrived at, had a long history and experience of state administration, like Egypt. In Egypt, Greek was, at the time, Greek was the state language. Coptic was the Demotique, that was the common language, and it took Arabic about 100 years before it was able to take over from these languages. The same is true in the Iberian Peninsula, in North Africa as well. So from Egypt it moved to the Nile Valley and various other places in Africa. These migrations of Arab tribes continued into the 13th century to various parts of Africa. When it reached in North Africa, of course, the majority of the indigenous population there were speakers of various dialects of Amazigh, or the so-called Berber languages. It also reached as far as Indonesia, Malaysia, the Indian subcontinent, parts of China, and so on and so forth. It established a huge presence in this region in particular. Two important dynasties with whom this spread is associated, namely the Umayyads, who ruled from Damascus, and the Abbasids, who ruled from Baghdad. And it was during the Abbasids that the Arabic language was codified. This is just to continue the story, and of course we know that Arabic declined with the decline. So it spread with the success, the military success of its speakers, and also declined with the decline of the political, with politics, with political domination of the Arabs. A few points in history are marked that led eventually to the decline of Arabic. In the case of Baghdad, the invasion by the Mongols, but also the loss of Andalusia. So Arabic retreated, so to speak, as a mother tongue. It only continued to be spoken in these places. So by this time, a large proportion of these populations had been Arabized, such that Arabic remained to this day. A very important period of decline was during the Ottoman Empire, 400 to 500 years of domination. But the language of the state was Turkish, written in Arabic script at the time. But whereas Turkish became the official language of these states, it never really managed to oust Arabic as the popular tongue. So Arabic continued to be the language of the majority of East Mediterranean, especially Fertile Crescent, if you like. but it declined in the use as an official language, as a language of state, but continued to be spoken. Okay. During the Middle Ages is when Arabic was codified in the Abbasid court in particular, and during the 8th and 9th centuries, generally speaking. Based on, you might have heard of the very famous grammarian from the Middle Ages, Sibawayh, who himself was Persian, not Arab, but he is credited for the most part with the codification of Arabic, producing a huge book that we continue to use to this day, that is called the book, Al-Kitab. Now, of course, the question is, on what basis did they codify? Was Arabic codified? It is very likely that the form of the language that they codified was not a spoken variety, but a collection of Arabic varieties. They relied for the most part on the pre-Islamic odes, for instance, the Quranic text, which is also consonantal without vowels and wasn't dotted even for some time, and also on several varieties that were spoken inside the peninsula proper. Now, this form over time became canonized and prescribed as the only correct form of Arabic, and to this day this is the popular view of what standard Arabic is. Often it is called Al-Fusha, which translates as the most eloquent of Arabics, yeah, that everyone aspires to acquire. And a modern version of that is called Modern Standard Arabic. The point to remember here is that there is no evidence really that this form of Arabic that the grammarians codified was a spoken lect, that there was such a group for whom this was a mother tongue. Okay, now this situation led to a famous aspect that people talk about. Often students of linguistics, this is what they start with, that Arabic is a diaglossic language. The word diaglossic comes from Greek, so double tongues. Basically what it means is linguistic duality, which continues to be the case in Arabic speaking provinces. Do we have any Greeks here? You might be familiar with Arabic. Is not the only language that suffers, I wanted to say, for wanting of another word, of this situation, diaglossic situation. Greek used to be diaglossic until the 1970s, and it was resolved. So what this means is that there are two norms of the language. One that is called the standard Arabic language, which is not a mother tongue. There is not a single Arab that acquires this form of the language from parents. This is the natural way of acquiring language. Languages are acquired naturally from parent to child. They're passed on naturally. This form of the language is not acquired naturally. You have to go to school in order to learn it, basically. It is a learned variety. It is for the most part used for written purposes, and especially in oral performance, especially when reading from scripted text. So the news bulletins, for instance, are read in standard Arabic. It is also the language of religious ceremonies in both Islam and Christianity. Standard or classical Arabic is used. And this point about it being uniform throughout the Arabic-speaking provinces is an important point, because it is often called upon as a reason why Arabic does not need reform. So the view is that because it is shared between all of these Arabic speaking provinces, it is an element of unity. Now, one point that I would like to point out is that the uniformity of standard Arabic is sometimes exaggerated. It is almost uniform, and increasingly we see variation. So if you grab a newspaper from, for instance, from Morocco and another from Saudi Arabia, you will notice some differences. And in fact, I had a student who worked on that, and the differences go beyond lexicon. So there are also structural differences in the syntax and the morphology. But to a large extent, it is uniform, yeah, but not totally. In addition to that, there are the spoken varieties or the vernaculars, the mother tongue. Every Arab acquires one of the vernaculars as a mother tongue, naturally acquired from home and environment. These are the varieties that are spoken for daily purposes. In the vast majority of domains, it is the vernaculars that are used, really. In addition to that, over perhaps the past 5-6 decades, a very important development is the emergence of what I call here de facto standards. These are local standards, which are normally based on the dialects spoken in large cities. So nowadays, when people talk about Egyptian Arabic, they immediately think of Cairo Arabic. But Cairo Arabic is only one variety of Egyptian Arabic that has been standardized naturally, yeah, through processes that we call koinization in Arabic. If people think of Syrian Arabic, they immediately think of Damascus Arabic. But Syrian Arabic is extremely variable. And the same is true of Egyptian Arabic. And such developments are happening, in fact, almost everywhere in the Arab world. My most recent project was on the emergence of such a standard in Jordan, for instance. Until recently, the capital city of Jordan did not have a dialect of its own, but a dialect has been formed and is increasingly becoming the standard, the norm of what we call Jordanian Arabic, and so on and so forth. Now, if you want to compare the situation with a situation like English, for instance, then it is these standards that would be analogous to what we call standard English, not this one. Okay? So, standard English, true, is spoken by a minority of the population. Perhaps Peter Truggell thinks perhaps 20% of the population, but minority, that is. And if we add to that standard English grammar with the accent that is perceived as standard accent in England, namely received pronunciation, then Peter Truggell reckons that probably no more than 3 to 5% of the population speak this norm naturally and acquire it naturally. So, nonetheless, standard English is a mother tongue. It is acquired naturally, without the need to go to school. And because of this, I say that it is the local standards in the Arabic-speaking provinces that are analogous to the status, socio-linguistic status of standard English, not this one. Okay. Now, to the relationship, this is another myth that needs to be dispelled about Arabic. Because of this aura and canonization of standard Arabic, the vast majority of lay people, not linguists, think that the vernaculars are not only corrupt versions of the language, but also that they directly descended from the formal standard Arabic. Now, this is not the case. The reality is that, based on the evidence that we have, is that all of these varieties of Arabic are actually sister languages, rather than one being the parent language from which the others have descended. In fact, the evidence that we have, that Ahmed works on, demonstrates that what we call classical Arabic, or the language of the Quran, for instance, the language that was codified, had its roots in these early inscriptions. We can see the relationship between these very early inscriptions and the language that was later on emerged as, or was codified and emerged as Standard Arabic or Classical Arabic, the one that is often referred to as such. Okay. Now, on to the second part. I realize that I am running out of time. I often do this. I go in all sorts of strands, so keep me on the straight and narrow, please.
Well, let me just say one thing. We have decided after the talk, for those who are interested in talking to Professor Al-Wer, you can go to Pendle and have a coffee there. So if we don't have time for many questions, we can just continue in the cafe and just talk to her. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I thought you might be interested in the regional classification. Arabic dialects are classified regionally according to the region in which they are spoken, and this is the conventional way of dividing them, classifying them into an Eastern group, or Mashriqi in Arabic, and the Western group, or Maghribi. And you notice that there are more variations in the Eastern part, which is not surprising, really. You often find this in all languages. The longer a language survives in a particular place, the more regional variations it develops. There are far more regional variations in England than in a huge place such as Australia, where English was taken there only yesterday, right? These are new varieties of English. So, so with the eastern part, you have all of these varieties, and you notice that the Nile Valley, even though geographically it is located in North Africa, is considered Eastern varieties for the most part. In fact, the isogloss, the border runs through Egypt. In addition to all of these familiar varieties are all Mashriqi varieties, or Eastern varieties, with these as Western varieties, and Maltese is classified as originally a Western variety, although there is some debate on Maltese. And here is a map showing that. So this line that I drew there is an imaginary line, but is based on linguistic analysis of the varieties of Western Egypt. So Manfred Voidig and Peter Benstedt believe that Egypt is a bridge variety. So the border between East and West runs through Egypt. So we call it isogloss in Arabic dialectology. What this suggests is that the varieties that are spoken to the west of this line are of the Moroccan type, of the Maghribi type, and the varieties that are spoken, including Cairo, spoken to the eastern part, are of the Mashriqi type. And I'll show a map of Cairo and Nile Delta in a second. Okay. Now, in addition to regional variation in the classification of Arabic dialects, there are other dimensions of variations within regions. So social, for instance, there are variations that are often based on the origins of these dialects as belonging to one of these norms. So we talk about dialects that are akin to the Bedouin norm versus varieties that are akin to the sedentary norm. And the sedentary norm includes both the urban and the rural. So, and within the sedentary norm, we can find dimensions of urban versus rural. In fact, you find these two dimensions in all regions where Arabic is spoken. Geographical, based on topography, and I'll show a map that demonstrates that topography influences the configuration of linguistic variation in Arabic and other languages as well. And you sometimes in various places find that sometimes variation is constrained by confessional or sectarian affiliation. So the very well-known cases that have been studied in the Arab world include Baghdad, Blanc pointed out that the three sects actually speak different varieties of Arabic. The Jewish varieties of North Africa are also different varieties. In Bahrain, the two major groups that constitute the community of Bahrain also speak different varieties. The Baharna group, who are for the most part Shi'i, is a sedentary type of dialect versus the Arab group, this is what they're called, who are for the most part Sunni, and their varieties akin to the Bedouin norm. There is also the dimension of, so if you close in within communities, you very often, and I'll show examples of that if I had time, that are variations that are based on age, gender, contact, mobility, social network, blah, 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 a host of social factors that influence configuration of variation. Okay. Now, I was going to give a little bit of background from linguistics so that the data that I present makes sense. So I'll do that very quickly. Now, 2 facts about any human language that linguists work within. No linguist is known who does not subscribe to this, that all languages vary. There is no such a thing as a language system that is not variable. And that this variation is not random. It is structured variation, and that languages change. The only languages that do not change are dead languages. Languages that are preserved in books on the shelf do not change, but languages that are used are in a perpetual state of gradual change. That is why we don't notice it readily. And that these 2 facts about language are related in the sense that you cannot have change without a preceding stage of variation. It's a bit like this. If you're moving from form A to form B, so this is a typical prototypical case of language change. What happens in the transition from this to this? No one goes to bed pronouncing butter as butter and wakes up the following morning saying butter. What happens is that gradually the new pronunciation, if we're talking about pronunciation features, starts to creep in. And if this variation, if this new innovation is successful, it increases in the speech of the individual as well as in the speech of the community as a whole, until you get a stage where it becomes the majority. And that's normally people notice language change at this stage, when it's too late really to do, and they start complaining about it, but it's too late. And eventually until the new form takes over. So all of these stages in the transition from form A to form B are stages of variation, and that is why the study of variation, the structure of variation, is very important in order to understand how we moved from here to here. Sociolinguists focus on this stage in order to understand this. Okay. Now, I thought I'll give some examples of how topographical features can influence configuration of linguistic variation. This is a very famous case from China that was studied by our colleague, the late Rudolf de Jong. Sadly, we lost him last year, which shows, this is a real picture, yeah, which shows this escarpment is called the T escarpment. And this is the same as this that was constructed by Rudolf, who studied all of the dialects in China. And what you notice is that the T forms a natural barrier to communication. And this you can see by the fact that all of the dialects that are spoken north of the T, this escarpment, are of the same type, as opposed to the varieties that are spoken down there. Another example of topographical features configuring linguistic variation comes from Egypt, from the work of Manfred Voidig and Peter Benstedt. So just north of Cairo, the Nile branches off into two main branches, tributaries. This is the Damietta and the Rosetta. During the Middle Ages, they tell us, trade route was established. So here the waterway actually functioned to facilitate the transmission of linguistic features, such that all of these communities that emerged along the trade route of the Damietta developed common linguistic features. So that spread outwards from Cairo, and this continues to be the case today. These communities converged also culturally and were able later on, the Voidig and Benstedt tell us, they became so strong in identity that they were able to fend off incursions that came in later on in the 12th and 13th century of more Bedouin groups moving into the Nile Delta from the eastern side as well as from the western side. They fended off, if you like, these incursions of Bedouin dialects, such that it is these people who accommodated to the already established dialects in this region. I'll bypass that because I have this is from Syria, I have no time. And just to give you an idea of what else happens by way of regional colonization. Earlier I talked about the emergence of de facto standards within each country. In addition to standards within each country, there is such a thing as regional standards. So outsiders to the region that we call the Levant, from which I come, the people outside this region perceive all of these dialects in the region as being one. So I am often mistaken in Morocco, for instance, for speaking Lebanese, which to the people from my region is funny, because you couldn't get more different. Jordanian from Lebanese is very different to the people who live there, but to outsiders they sound similar. And there are very good reasons as to why, objective reasons, as to why outsiders would perceive these dialects as being similar, and that is that dialects within the same region over time develop features that are common to them. This is what I call here regional coinization. This, for instance, is a quick demonstration of how quickly this process can happen. This comes from our data of the change in the pronunciation of the sound qa, which is standard sound and used to be characteristic of the traditional dialect of the Palestinian city of Nablus. This has completely changed to an a pronunciation, a glottal stop there. This sound, not coincidentally, is the urban city sound in the Levant par excellence. So now if you look at absolutely all of the cities in the Levant, Beirut, Damascus, Amman is moving in that direction, Haifa, Jaffa, Jerusalem, all of them absolutely share this sound as a reflex of this sound. Now, this is also a very good example of how a feature that is identical to classical Arabic does not necessarily survive, okay? This is a family. Within 3 generations, this completely changed. Now, this is from the research of Sarah Shiadi in Oman. I'm closing in, on communities to look at what influences linguistic change within communities, and this varies. So in this case, for instance, Sarah was looking at change in the pronunciation of the sound j, which in this dialect used to be y and is progressively becoming y, similarly to Muscat. So the dialect of Muscat is the target here. I don't have time to say more, but the figures that I'm showing you are based on statistics that were tested, subjected to statistical significance. This comes from North Jordan, and you see that gender and mobility interact as well as age with respect to 3 features. Here in this community, we notice that men are ahead of women in using the innovative features. There is a very good reason why that is. The men in this small town, it's a village really, the vast majority of them commute to the large city, commute to Amman for work. The vast majority of the women work locally as teachers or doctors or what have you. By comparison, so this is from the same community farther north, from the Jordanian community. This is from the work of Noura Abu Ain in the far north of Jordan. And here you find in the younger generation, so in the older generation, the women lag behind, but in the younger generation, they're far ahead of the men in using the innovations. More of this similar type, this comes from Saudi Arabia, of an immigrant group of the Ghamdis in Mecca. You notice that in the older generation, the women lag behind seriously, and all of these differences are significant statistically. The men are ahead of them, and then in later generations, you see women overtaking and compensating for that ahead of men. This is from Medina in Saudi Arabia, the work of Abir Hussein. You notice a more or less similar pattern where the oldest women are very conservative, the youngest women are extremely innovative, overtaking the men. This comes from Dammam in Saudi Arabia and Gal'at Sikr in southern Iraq. In both cases, it was found that the national standard also influences the trajectory of change. It's the national standard, not standard Arabic, the national standard that in this case it is Riyadh, in this case it is Baghdad, and change is moving in that direction. And finally, this is an extremely interesting case from far South Arabia, Tihamat Qahtan, that was studied by my former student Khayriya Al-Qahtani, which shows you see the same pattern to begin with. In the older generation, the male speakers are ahead of the female speakers. But here, if you look at the younger generation, whereas the male speakers only have really minimal, and this is not significant, minimal increase in the use of the innovative feature, but look at the women, where the women are. Now, it turns out, Khayriya's explanation for that is that the local dialect is used as a commercial, as a commodity. The men here are involved in selling their honey in the big city, and they actually use their dialect, their local dialect, to authenticate the honey. So when people go to buy honey, if they hear the local dialect, they are more likely to buy the honey. And she thinks that this is the motivation for the men for preserving this particular sound. And I'll just finish with a few concluding remarks that these different patterns that we find reflect idiosyncrasies of these communities. It is definitely inaccurate to talk about Arabic as a collective, to say, to make inferences about where change is moving by making statements such as Arabic speakers do this or do that. We have to look at each community separately. And the trajectory of change is, in Arabic vernaculars, is independent of the grammar of the formal standard. That is for sure. And as a non-native variety that is standard Arabic or classical Arabic does not really play a role, nor does it have a normative effect on the structure of variation in the core grammar of the vernaculars. And in order to understand the trajectory of change, we have to begin with the micro attributes of the local dialect. and the community in which it is spoken. That is, we must begin with the specific and gradually expand to more generalizable trends. And finally, basic to this bottom-up approach that we advocate, myself and my research associates, is the assumption that generalizations, if there are any, can best be identified through an aggregate of locally based studies. And thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you. So I don't know whether we should take questions now or should we go to the cafe in 5 minutes? Is there any questions now maybe?
Yeah.
Quick question.
Yeah, sure.
I wonder what the effect of social media is having on change.
Yeah,
Is
yeah.
it speeding up? Is it diverging different ways in different places? Or
Yeah, people tend to think that media has more effect than it really does. The media, there is a lot of research in Britain on that, and it turns out that maybe lexical items can be transmitted that way and they can be influential, but structural features like pronunciation features or syntactic features are not spread through the media. Now we can, for instance, point to the fact that probably up and down the country in England people watch more or less the same programs. If the media had such a normative effect, we might find that down south and up north people converge in their speech, but the fact is that apparently in England dialects are diverging rather than converging. So it's a tricky question and has to be looked at per community, but there are certainly features that can be transmitted. People do imitate. So some people have suggested, for instance, that th for th has spread from London to the north. Yeah, okay. But there are various things that we can say about this sound. All children produce a th, thank you, and thief, regardless of whether they're in the south or the north, because this sound is perceptually difficult to understand. If I turn my back to you, sorry, and say thank you, could you tell whether I said thank you or thank you? Probably no. Right, okay. And that's probably why children, in addition to articulatory difficulties. So for this sound to become th is quite expected. It's a natural change, if you like. So it's a question that is valid, but needs investigation carefully, variety by variety.
Sorry?
Thank you for
Thank you.
فرصة
One question.
تشرفنا فيك.
Thank you very much. One is for Jaime and one online, right?
If the online wants to, like, for me, it's just a curiosity, you know. Like, you talk about the difference between the variations of Arabic and the sister languages of Arabic. There are such things as loan words between Arabic versions, like some Moroccan word that has been loaned to an Eastern variety of the Arabic.
Not really. You do find loan words within the same regions, but sometimes, for instance, people now, with increase in opportunity of communication between distant varieties, they do use expressions for special effect, either sometimes mimicking or making jokes or that sort of thing, but really to point to borrowings that have been assimilated and included in, say, Jordanian Arabic from Moroccan Arabic. Not really, but you find that happening a lot within the same region.
I'm asking because from my experience in Spanish, we have all the varieties of Spanish in Latin America, and for younger generations, we have seen that we have receiving many loan words from them. So I was asking because maybe, as Professor Reason suggested about the social media, it was a way for younger generations to share their own regional terms with other parts.
Yeah,
of the
that can happen.
Well,
Obviously, so names of dishes, for instance, can be transmitted that way.
Because I think that here the culture, like the music, coming a lot from Latin America, from Puerto Rico, from Colombia, maybe has influence, and maybe Egyptian and Lebanese singers have influence on the
Yes,
rest of
yes, yes. But to what extent they would have influenced the core structure of the dialect is doubtful. Yeah.
I think we have a question from Rocio online.
Yes, thank you, Professor Mitko. First of all, thank you, Professor Al-Wer, because it has been a really informative and interesting presentation for me as a linguist. I'm sorry to not be there today. I'm very sick. So I have around 5 questions. So I know whether we are out of time. So whenever you want to cut me, just cut me. Okay. So first of all, a question that I've actually been asking to my Arabic-speaking colleagues there at the office is that from a linguistic point of view, when a language has internal changes, such as grammar and syntax changes, then it becomes another language. It's not a variety anymore, it's not a variant, it's not a dialect, it's another language. So, as far as I understand, in this Arabic variant, you do have internal changes in terms of syntax and grammar. So why do you keep calling them dialects instead of different Arabic languages?
Yeah, very good question. Thank you very much. As you are aware, the designating a variety as a dialect of another language or an independent language is very much a political question. So while there may be linguistic grounds, for instance, for considering, let's say, the very distant varieties, so Moroccan Darija, the vernacular Moroccan, and most of the Eastern varieties, there are certainly probably more differences than, say, between Castilian Spanish and Catalan. But the question as to why not is a socio-linguistic question, is a socio-political question. But you're absolutely right. If we want to compare different linguistic systems around the world that are considered different languages, Serbo-Croatian, Serbian and Croatian, so there are far more differences between some varieties of Arabic that would probably merit calling them different languages. I mean, look at Maltese. The fact that Maltese is considered a different language is of course a political question. Malta separated, was not under the influence of Standard Arabic. This uniform language developed on its own in isolation, was affected by Italian and English, but to this day its syntax is and morphology, and to some extent also the phonology, betrays its origin as an Arabic dialect, and yet it is called a different language. But I agree with you, of course.
Okay, so just to be quick, I'm gonna skip some of the questions. I may drop you a line,
yes,
however, after the lecture.
Please do.
So, just because I got the data, because I've been working on that, the estimated population who uses Standard English as a mother tongue is estimated between 3 and 5% of the population only.
With
So
RP accent. With RP accent. With RP
Exactly.
accent. Yeah.
And then just a note for those who don't know, standardization process in English started at the early 18th century. So that means that the standardization process in Arabic started 10 centuries ago.
That's right.
Which is 10 centuries before, which is a very long period.
That's right.
Linguistically speaking. So do you think if hadn't this standardization process started so early, the classic Arabic language would have had the opportunity to split into different languages, such as Latin did with Romantic languages?
Could be, yeah. If the yes, absolutely. If the socio-political situation had been accommodating to an eventuality of this sort, yes, definitely. But one point about Arabic standardization, it stopped. It was done in the 8th century, so during the period that we're talking about, Old English period, yeah, and it stopped. It was canonized there, yeah. To this day, this is the only norm that is considered legitimate. And modern standard Arabic actually changes in the direction of the vernaculars, but these changes are not legitimized. They're not considered legitimate in the classroom, for instance. They're considered corruptions of the language. So these attitudes actually stop that from happening. Stop these developments that would probably bring the standard, the formal standard, closer to the spoken vernaculars by attitudes of this sort.
Vernaculars are not influencing prescriptive rules. So
Yes,
prescriptive rules have stayed the same until
That's right.
the
That's
16th
right.
century.
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
You notice that English continues to be standardized. I mean, on a regular basis, the English lexicon, for instance, accepts new terms and new constructions, whereas Arabic does not. So this form of Arabic isn't
Lucy,
amenable to
unfortunately,
that.
we don't have time for more questions because there are several people who wanted to talk to Professor Al-Wer, and she has a taxi in 25 minutes, so I think we're
Yeah,
running
I
out of time.
will drop her.
Please, please,
Thank you
please
so
do,
much.
and thank you so much
Thank you
for
very
your
much.
interest.
And we would like to thank Professor Al-Wer for her absolutely exciting and amazing talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.